Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies, gentlemen, and students. On behalf of World Information Transfer, I would like to express our deep appreciation to the government of Ukraine for co-sponsoring the 22nd International Conference on Health and Environment, Global Partners for Global Solutions, and the missions of Hungary and Singapore for supporting it. I would also like to express our gratitude to His Excellency Yuri Sergeyev, Permanent Representative of Ukraine, Mr. Thomas Gass, Deputy Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs, UNDESA, Mr. Nihu Seth, Director of Division for Sustainable Development, UNDESA, our esteemed speakers, and the University of Westchester for bringing a couple of busloads of students, the future of this planet. World Information Transfer is dedicated to the studying the connection between environmental degradation and human health, and in identifying solutions to remediate our environment, and by doing so, improving the health and quality of life of Earth's citizens. Each year, for the past 22 years, I have been reciting a list of accomplishments that have galvanized the global community to attain sustainability. Unfortunately, with all the knowledge that all of us have gleaned, most of our leaders still do not have a deep connection to the Earth, and our planet is continuing to degrade, as well as the health of its inhabitants. The world can get along, as Dr. Robert Solow of MIT stated, without natural resources. So exhaustion is just an event, not a catastrophe. But can the inhabitants? Can we? We have been listening to the ills of our planet since 1972, the first United Nations Conference on Human Environment in Stockholm, Sweden, and have been conscious that we are living at the expense of the future by exhausting the resources that will be needed by the future generations. We continue to contaminate the air that we breathe, fill our land and water with waste disposal, destroy our forests at an unprecedented rate, erode our fertile soil, destroy our ozone layer, and continue to exacerbate our climate and the extinction of millions of species. We thought that environmental problems were attributable to ignorance, inadequate government, administrations, and multinational companies. To some extent, this is still the case. There are countries that lack the necessary technologies due to many difficulties that they are facing, including lack of enabling environments due to the lack of good governance and rule of law and population explosion. Others still profit from the sale of pesticides and dumping of toxic materials in the developing world. We have learned that environmental issues are of international concern and need international collaboration. However, this growing awareness is progressing at a much slower pace than the destruction of our habitat. A social order that was created by cultures without fundamental world justice cannot sustain itself. We need to change the culture, whether one of consumption or one that gives rise to increased populations. Both are unsustainable. Our present civilization, our culture, our values are endangering our world, and it is up to the young generation, those that will lead the future, to galvanize those that are unable or unwilling to attain a culture that will benefit future humanity. That is why I am so proud that each year at our conferences we have large numbers of young people, as they need to hold all of us accountable, since we already live on their expense, and those who will come after them. In conclusion, I would like to end with a quote from Jonas Salk, medical researcher and developer of polio vaccine, who, when asked who owns the patent for this vaccine, answered, "Why, the people." Thank you. Okay. Oh. I wanted to mention that this session is webcast, also that all of the speeches are going to be on the internet. All you need to do is check with our immediate director. And at the present time, I would like to introduce Ambassador Yuri Sergeyev, is the permanent representative of Ukraine to the United Nations. Mr. Sergeyev has been the permanent representative since May 2007. Prior to that appointment, he was ambassador to France, during which time he was also permanent representative of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. Ambassador Sergeyev has also been the Secretary of State at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, the Ambassador to Greece and Albania, and headed the Foreign Ministry Directorate for Information. Your Excellency.
Thank you, Dr. Durbach, for introducing me. Dear colleagues, distinguished guests, I am honored to represent Ukraine as a co-host of this essential open dialogue at the United Nations that give us an opportunity to discuss a number of the most relevant items of the United Nations Development Agenda. First of all, let me thank the co-organizers of this event, Dr. Kristina Durbach, and the World International Transfer for being sustainable host and partner for these conferences during the long 22 years. I would also like to welcome our distinguished speakers of today, Mr. Nihil Set, the Director of the UN Sustainable Development, the representatives of the missions of Hungary and Singapore to the United Nations, and our colleagues from academia, Princeton and Columbia Universities, and from the Electric Power Research Institute. Dear colleagues, Ukraine is confident that broad international discussion within the United Nations is a fundamental element in order to frame the national and global priorities for the future development programs of the United Nations. The topic of our conference is sustainability risks. However, let me say a few words that World Sustainable Agenda is a long process, which was started almost 15 years ago. In the year of 2000, the United Nations Millennium Declaration defined a global vision of the development in the form of the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs. These goals have a clear system of targets and indicators as well as time frames for achieving them. Reaching the MDGs means real changes in people's living standards. In September this year, world leaders gathered in the Special General Assembly event to discuss the efforts made towards achieving the MDGs. It was highlighted that with the 2015 target date of the MDGs fast approaching, the outcome document should focus on existing gaps and weaknesses of the MDGs, accelerating of implementations and looking forward to the post-2015 development agenda. The country stated that during the past 13 years of two left, we have achieved a lot, especially in poverty eradication and health care. Since 2004, and being the first post-Soviet country to adopt the MDGs, Ukraine has prepared a number of annual monitoring reports. In September 2013, Ukraine presented at the United Nations its third national report on acceleration of MDGs. This publication incorporates the assessments of 200 leading experts from various scientific, economic, and research institutions. It is also available online. Dear colleagues, there is no doubt that every developing nation is striving to reach Millennium Development Goals and incorporate successful achievements into the post-2015 development agenda. It means that in 2015, after the MDGs are achieved, the member states will need the new guidelines for their post-2015 agenda. It means that we need to elaborate the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. The UN member states are now in a challenging process of outlining their positions to the issues of sustainable and inclusive economic growth, macroeconomics and infrastructure development, as well as climate change, health, gender equality, and many other topics. I am sure that Director Nihil Set has much more to explain, being the UN captain for the MDGs and SDGs. But I have to add that Ukraine, as well as other UN member states, are now in a challenging process of outlining their key priorities for the potential development strategies for the next decades. I would emphasize that Ukraine supports the activity of the General Assembly Open Working Group on Sustainable Development Goals, where countries can discuss their SDGs priorities. By the way, its 5th session was ended successfully just last week, and Ukraine has presented its view on an energy issue. We are confident that national economies should grow and social standards should rise in the future decades. Therefore, energy should be definitely included into the SDGs agenda. However, energy item for Ukraine's economy is a multi-sided issue and has the diversified approach for the energy supply and production without compromising its sustainability. Renewable energy is becoming an integral part of the energy system. However, because of the cost and infrastructure still remains a challenge. Ukraine's reliance only on alternative or renewable energy sources or burning of fossil fuels will not resolve economic and social development issues in the future. By saying that, I mean that over 50% of energy supply in our country is produced by peaceful atom. We believe that sustainable nuclear energy approach should be taken into account by the member states, especially those which rely on such technology. The new approach must ensure comprehensive consideration of security, social and environmental aspects, particularly in priority areas such as ecological safety, comprehensive environmental conservation, and prudent management. Only such approach will facilitate sustainable development of energy, especially as regards efficiency and safety of its nuclear sector. Having Chernobyl resolution on the General Assembly agenda, we are confident that immense experience of almost 30 years of long activity of how to manage and revitalize the nuclear accident consequences should not be lost for the international community. Dear colleagues, I try to shape the main ideas for the Ukrainian delegation in the United Nations Development Agenda. And now I guess that it is time to listen to the views and approaches of distinguished colleagues here. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Your Excellency, for giving us an update on the sustainable efforts of Ukraine, which basically has co-sponsored this conference for 22 years. So, before we continue, I would like to remind you that it has been our tradition not to take questions from the floor. Please fill in the questions, and the monitors will collect them, and then all the speakers are going to be able to answer them. Thank you. I would like to present to you now Mr. Nihil Set. Mr. Set is the Director of Division for Sustainable Development, Department of Economics and Social Affairs, DESA. He was also the head of the Rio +20 Secretariat, where he spearheaded the preparations for the UN Commission on Sustainable Development Conference in Rio. With over 20 years of service to the United Nations, Mr. Set has served as Special Assistant and Chief of Office to the Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Secretary of the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, and the Second Committee of the General Assembly, and as Director of DESA Office for ECOSOC Support and Coordination. Before joining the UN Secretariat, he was a delegate to the UN in the Permanent Mission of India and involved in various UN conferences and summits, including the Rio Summit on Environment and Development, the Copenhagen Summit on Social Development, the Monterrey Conference on Financing for Development, the Mauritius Conference of Small Island Developing States, the Millennium Summit, the World Summit on Sustainable Development, and the UN World Summit. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Christine, Ambassador Sergeyev, distinguished other representatives on this podium, all you young people out there, ladies, gentlemen. I've been coming to this conference now for several years, and it's such a pleasure for me to be with you and to interact with you and to learn what are your concerns and your priorities. I can, of course, bring to you what are the kind of priorities that the UN is focusing on and how we are looking at this rather complex issue of sustainability as we go ahead. As you know, as Ambassador Sergeyev has mentioned, we did define a set of goals some years ago, 13 years ago, which were called the Millennium Development Goals, and they focused on the basic human deprivations. They focused on issues like poverty, on hunger, on health, on education, on gender equality and empowerment, of environmental sustainability. But what I would challenge you all is to think of the poorest person you've ever known, and to think, what are the forces that act on this person which prevent him from moving up by giving a life of dignity, a life of respect, a life where his hunger, his other needs are taken care of? What are the complex forces that act upon this individual? I'm giving you this challenge only because I want to help you find a segue into what the UN is doing of defining a post-2015 development agenda, which not only looks at the minimum deprivations as we defined in the MDGs, but we go much beyond. And in doing so, let's look at the individual. Let's look at this poor person, the poorest person you've ever met, and let's look at the forces which are acting on him or her. Now, clearly, of course, it's poverty, it's income poverty, it's hunger, it's education, it's health, lack of facilities, access to health facilities. It's the environment that is working against him. It's the oppression, the inequalities that they face. It's the discrimination that is faced in many communities in poor parts of the world. But there are a whole set of other forces acting on the individual. It's the environment he lives in, the kind of sanitary facilities, the availability of water, poor air quality, the threat to life and limb, the lack of security. These are the second set of forces that are acting on this individual. And there are a third set of forces acting on this individual, and these are called the slow onset events. Events like climate change, events like the sort of state of our oceans and what that is doing to the availability of protein and nutrition to them. It's the loss of biodiversity. It's land degradation. So you have these three sets of forces which are acting, which are preventing this person from breaking out from the cycle of poverty and deprivation and to moving into higher trajectories where that person can enjoy a life of dignity. So how do we address these challenges? How do we make sure that by 2030 and beyond, none of these forces operate on this individual, where the individual can break away from all these deprivations to live a life of dignity? And for that, the UN is now grappling with what they call the Sustainable Development Goals. Goals which go much beyond and look much more deeply into these issues than the Millennium Development Goals did. And here, I want to come to the concept of sustainable development, because sustainable development essentially looks at these forces which are economic forces. These are forces which meet the economic aspirations of individuals. There are the social forces, social aspirations of people to move up on the social ladder. And of course, there are these other environmental forces which prevent that individual breaking out. So it's this intersection of economic, social, and environmental forces. And unless they are seen in their totality in a holistic way, we are not going to succeed in breaking out from this trap of poverty and deprivation. So sustainable development is a tool to look at, in an integrated way, of decision-making and other processes which will meet people's economic aspirations, because that's at the core of people's, what motivates people, their economic aspirations, to look at their social aspirations and to look at their environmental fears together in a holistic way. And that's what we are trying to do in the Sustainable Development Goals, to look at the whole series of issues, the intersections of these issues. It's for these reasons that I'm very happy that your topic today focuses on two crucial issues, on health and the environment, because these are very closely intertwined and you can't discuss one without looking at the other. And we know what these intersections are, but it's our ability to see these intersections more forcefully and in all the kind of cross impacts they have on each other, the negative and the positive spin-offs that they have on each other, which is so crucial. And I see from your program, you have a rich program where you're looking at different facets of these intersections. So the way in which you discuss these, the way in which you see these, the way in which you develop ideas around these intersections, that is the core of sustainable development. So it's very important that while you're looking at sustainability issues, on the issues of environment and health, you do explore all these issues. Now let's look at what are these intersections between environment and health, and how can we have a mutually reinforcing process where taking actions on the environment, taking actions on health will be mutually supportive to each other. Let's look at local issues. I want to go into the global commons issues, issues like climate change and oceans and land deforestation, loss of biodiversity and so on a little later. But I wanted to first look at the local impacts of what are the forces, intersections between environment and health. First, I think in large parts of the world, sanitation is such an important issue. And open defecation, the billions of people who don't have a toilet, and what that does to the local health is appalling in terms of dysentery, other diseases, the deaths that causes, how all this gets into the water system, and the kind of impacts that have. So I would say clean sanitation, safe sanitation is one of the most important environmental intersections with health. The second, it was mentioned, I think, by the ambassador, that the whole issue of waste management, particularly in cities, is going to be a very important determinant of the sanitary conditions in which people live. The third is air quality. We know how, for example, issues like motorized transportation, factories using not very clean processes of production, what that does to the particulates in the air, and how that impacts upon health, the respiratory health, the rheumatology, the illnesses which are generated by this lack of clean air. The millions of women and children who die because they use not clean cook stoves, they use biomass for cooking, and what that does to the smoky environment in small homes and the impact that has on people's lives and that quality. Then, of course, the whole issue of water quality, the issue of chemical pollution, the issue of the kind of urban congestion we live in. And remember, as we look to the future, because this, of course, sustainability is your agenda. It's an agenda for the young people. It's an agenda for the future generations. And as we look 20, 30 years into the future, urbanization will be one of the most strongest trends in changes in the way people live and work, and how that is going to impact on the infrastructure of cities, and how all these things that I mentioned on sanitation, on water, on air quality, and on chemical pollution, on particulates in the air, how all those are going to make, in a large part, particularly of the developing world, urban hell for people to have a healthy and healthy life. So these are forces that will be acting at the local level. And on many of these solutions have to be local. They have to be done by the mayors, by local governments, by municipalities, by citizens groups, who have to focus on the ways in which the air quality has to be improved, in ways in which the water quality has to be improved. So these forces are going to be acting very strongly. So these are the local manifestations of the impact of the environment on health. Then we look at the global issues, issues like climate change, what that's doing to vector-borne diseases, increasing temperatures, and what that means for malaria, for example, and what that has to do with water availability, and so on. So there's a whole set of issues which are generated by our lack of taking serious action on mitigating climate impacts and how that's impacting on local health. And this is an issue which is not given as much prominence as it deserves. When we look at climate change, we normally switch our minds totally to the water issues, which is on melting ice, on rising sea levels, on extreme weather events. But all these have deep implications on human health, which must not lose sight of. And on oceans, what we are doing by overexploiting our fish stocks, by making less protein available to people, and what that means for nutrition and health. So there are lots of intersections, whether you look at global issues or you look at local issues, and the impact that has on human health. So health is at the core of sustainable development. It is a right and a goal in its own right. It also means, it is also a means of measuring success across the whole sustainable development agenda. That's why it's important for a meeting like yours to bring to the governments the importance that the health agenda is in meeting the needs of the future we want, to meeting the healthy needs of our future generations. Health encompasses broad well-being. It's not only the absence of diseases. Universal health coverage and equitable access to quality basic health services are issues raised by many governments and by non-state actors. Other important issues which have come up in the UN's consideration of how to look at sustainable development goals are health promotion, prevention, and treatment. Communicable diseases are still a burden in many countries, but non-communicable diseases increasingly affect all countries, highlighting the need to promote healthy diets and lifestyles. There is a need to address access and health needs of persons with disabilities. The discussions that are taking place between governments have highlighted the importance of equal access of women and girls to healthcare services, including addressing women's sexual and reproductive health and ensuring universal access to safe, effective, affordable and acceptable modern methods of family planning. Aging populations is the other big demographic trend, which is posing a major healthcare challenge in many countries. There is a overlap between health risks facing the young and the old. So how do we break through all this? How do we get these intersections? We should focus on getting basic health services to all. We should focus on global partnerships for health and for the environment. We've tried over the past so many years to integrate these economic, social, and environmental issues into this theorem of sustainable development, but the time now has come. And I think your deliberations here, your ability to bring these forces together, to break down the silos which have often helped look at environmental issues separately, health issues separately, education issues separately, inequalities issues separately, to bring them together in a comprehensive and an umbrella sustainable development goals and a post-2015 development agenda will help shake up the governments into viewing things differently, of reorienting their decision-making. So I hope that your wonderful agenda today and your ability to look at different aspects of this problem will enrich the way in which governments also will ultimately look at these issues. And I hope you do find a way. You're a consultative, you've got consultative status with ECOSOC, and I hope the World Information Transfer will be able to bring the messages you hear at this meeting to the relevant bodies to make sure that in our pursuit of this overarching agenda for the future, for the next 30 years, we have these perspectives brought together in a sensible and meaningful, policy-oriented way, in a way which inspires policymakers, which inspires people, which inspires communities, and brings about the change that we want to see in the world. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Mr. Seth, for a very inspirational presentation on all the forces that prevent changes in achieving sustainable development. We hope that we will be able to mitigate some of them shortly. And our next speaker is Ambassador Zsolt Gabor Hetezi, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Hungary to the United Nations. He has served as the Counterterrorism Coordinator at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also as the Director General of the Information Office in Budapest, Hungary. Ambassador Hetezi was the Vice President for the 17th session of the High-Level Committee on the South-South Cooperation and has also served as a Vice Chairman of the 6th Legal Committee of the General Assembly. Ambassador Hetezi earned a PhD from the School of Law of University of Pécs, Hungary, Masters of Law from the College of William and Mary in Virginia, and a JD from the School of Law of János Pannonius University in Pécs, Hungary. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Christine. Distinguished Ambassador, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to be here and brief you on one of the possibly most critical issues in front of us for sustainable development, which is the water-related issues. Although you might know that Hungary is co-chairing the Open Working Group on Sustainable Development, I have to make clear that today I am delivering my statement in my national capacity when I brief you on the event which happened only 2 months ago, less than 2 months ago in Budapest, which was the Budapest Water Summit. Now, the Budapest Water Summit came out as a consequence of the Rio +20 conference. Already in the Rio +20 conference, Hungary decided that we should have an international summit on water-related issues in order to further common understanding and discussions on water and sanitation in the framework of sustainable development. The conference itself built on a plethora of similar events. I just want to mention the Stockholm Water Conference, the Water Conference in Tajikistan as examples, and also some other processes that we, for example, have here in the UN in the framework of the Friends of Water group, which is co-organized by 5 countries, including Hungary, Tajikistan, Singapore, Finland, and Switzerland. Now, this event was the last major event of the International Year on Water Cooperation. We had approximately 1,400 participants from 105 countries. I think around 40 were represented at ministerial level, but what we were even more proud of was that we had all the stakeholders around the table, including academia, including the scientific community, including the financing community, including the civil, the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations. And indeed, at the end of the conference, we have adopted a report which has the title, "A Sustainable World is a Water-Secure World." And I think it has a lot of truth in it. It is not a product of consensus of countries, intergovernmental. It was not an intergovernmental process, but it is a summary of the general thinking of the stakeholders at the conference. So let me talk about the vision, how we see the future with regard to water-related issues. We do believe that in order to achieve sustainable development, we will have to have a goal, a dedicated goal on water-related issues, with so-called smarter targets. When we talk about smart or smarter targets, it's an acronym. We talk about specific, measurable, attainable, timely, realistic, and the ER is for evaluated and re-evaluated. It means that whatever we decide in 2015 at the end of the intergovernmental process, that will be the post-2015 development framework, we are quite sure that time to time we will have to take another look at what we are doing, where we are going, and we might have to evaluate and re-evaluate our goals and targets. Now, in relation to water, what do we have to achieve in order to have a sustainable world, in order to have sustainable water services for all of us? We do believe that we have to continue with the Mdg process. And that is, we have to achieve universal access to safe drinking water and sanitation to all. But then we have to move forward and go beyond the Mdgs. In order to have a sustainable system, we will have to make sure that we have integrated and cross-sectoral approaches to water management. We will have to reduce pollution and increase collection, treatment, and reuse of water. And finally, we will have to increase resilience against the water-related impacts of global changes. It seems to be a lot, but let me give you some more specific ideas with regard to each of these elements. First, about the MDG targets. If you take a look at the screen, you see where we are with regard to Mdg 7, which is to halve. Can we come back? I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. Which is to halve the number of population, the population that has no access to safe drinking water and sanitation. The red here also means bad things, which means that countries in red are not on track as far as reaching the Mdg Sanitation Target. With regard to water access, we are doing fine on a global level, but of course there are a lot of countries that are still lagging behind. The green, of course, is the good thing, and yellow means that by 2015, those countries who are painted in yellow will be able to achieve the Mdg target. You see a lot of countries in gray. Well, in that regard, what I can tell you is that in Europe, usually what you will have, if there is data, a lot of green, and in other parts of the world, you should expect a lot of red instead of yellow and green. So the first issue is definitely, and now we can go to the next slide. The first issue is to finish the unfinished business of the MDGs and do a little bit more. I will not spend too much time on it because we will have another speaker tackling this issue, but we do believe that access to safe drinking water and sanitation is a human right. So it's a human right-based approach. We do believe that we will have to achieve this within the framework of the SDGs. And I think that there is, in general, a political agreement within the governments, within the stakeholders, that whatever we have as unfinished business in the MDGs, we will have to carry over and put into the SDG system in a sustainable way. Here, access to water, sanitation, and hygiene, I think, is equally important. What we would like to make sure is that we have a target where we take care of not only the households, but also schools, health facilities, workplaces, and also emergency situations where you have to provide all of these accesses. Now, it is evident that if we achieve this, we will have achievements in different areas, which is poverty eradication. Of course, I have mentioned human rights, health, and I think that it would have a very cross-cutting consequence, a good consequence, if we can do that. Now, we also realized in Budapest, in the Budapest Water Summit, and of course during the processes that led up to the Budapest Water Summit, that we will have to address new challenges or other challenges if we want to make sure that whatever we do is sustainable. We always say that the MDGs are the starting points or the point of departure, but the SDGs should be, the sustainable development goals should be the point of destination. How to make the achievement sustainable? I think this is the simple question that we can ask from ourselves. The suggestion of the conference is very simple. First, we have to take these goals out of the silos and make them interconnected. Look at the relationship between the goals, make them comprehensive, and look at the drivers and enablers that make these goals attainable and also sustainable. So those are the major findings, so to speak. And based on those major findings, the conference listed 5 areas where we have to do more. One is the climate-adaptive water strategies, which also takes care of the transboundary issues. I will talk about that. We have already talked about the hydrological extremes that we will have to manage and prepare for. A lot of speakers have already mentioned the ecosystem services issue. That means that we will have to have goals that safeguard and possibly rehabilitate ecosystems and respect the so-called planetary boundaries. And also, we realized in Budapest that capacity development will be the key factor in achieving all of the other issues and targets that I have talked about. Now, if we want to come down to the so-called water strategies, what we will have to do, some of the speakers have already talked about good governance. And we do believe that good water governance is one of the issues that we have to tackle with a magic word that we call integrated water resources management. Now, if I want to simplify, it means that countries, and it's important, it's country ownership, will have to decide how much water they have, how they use it, and make sure that they use it in a balanced way, which is balanced between agricultural, urban, industrial use, but also balanced with the ecosystems, with the ecosystem requirements. And they have to look into trade-offs, unintended consequences. They have to look at the 3 pillars. And, of course, they have to put together a system that predicts or factors in the trends that we are working on. Nikhil Seth has mentioned some of them: urbanization, migration, population dynamics, climate change, and so on and so on. We say water productivity has to be doubled by 2025. It basically means that we will have to do more with less water, whether it is industrial, whether it is urban, whether it is agricultural use of water. We will just have to make sure that we use our water more prudently and more efficiently. And of course, we come to one of the trickiest issues, which is water cooperation. I have talked about countries' ownership, which is extremely important, but we have a little problem, and that is water doesn't abide by political borders. So therefore, what we have to do is to have a very clear-cut, hopefully law-based, international law-based cooperation agreement on the basin level that takes care of these issues. We used to say we have 2 options with regard to water. One is that we fight for it. The other is that we cooperate on it. It seems to us that the second should be or could be a little bit more productive than the first one. And I think this is one of the important elements, the important enablers and drivers that if we cannot get right, we will have major problems with regard to water in the next couple of years. Now, when we talk about agreements of cooperation, of course, it's about water sharing, water management, data sharing, warning systems that you can put together, as I have mentioned in the basin approach. Then let's talk about the other issue, which is sustainability. And indeed, sustainability is about the integrity of our systems. We also talk about intergenerational equity. Some speakers have talked about the future of the next generations, and I think this is what this target tries to achieve. Basically, maintenance and regeneration of ecosystem services. There is also a catchword for this. We say that we have to have green economy for blue water. And I think this is also a very good catchword. What we will see in the next couple of decades is that water use will go up. And this is something that we generate ourselves, because we say that, okay, everybody has to have access to drinking water, everybody has to have access to water for industrial growth, for agricultural growth, since we will have a larger population to feed, and so on and so on. So by generating access to water, we will also generating more pollution if we don't change our logic, so to speak. And I think this is one of the transformative changes that we will have to undertake in the next 15 years. We have to make sure that we prevent future water system deterioration. And of course, there is a saying, I think also a very important saying, that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This is again very important, and this is a lesson learned from the developed countries. If you take a look at the developed countries' pollution levels as far as water is considered, it's very high. If you take a look at the developed countries' drinking water cleanliness, safety record, it's very good. Now the problem is that what we do in the developed countries, and also in the developing countries nowadays, is that we pollute our waters, and then we spend enormous amount of money to make it drinkable for ourselves. Of course, by making it drinkable to ourselves, we solve half of the problem, because the ecosystem is still degrading. And if the ecosystem is degrading, then you can make sure that you can be sure that your water system is also degrading, and you have an enormous problem. I don't want to get into details because I'm running out of time, but on the slide you will find some of the ideas how we can make sure that our ecosystems and water systems are being rehabilitated in the next couple of decades. Now, last but not least, resilience-related issues. This picture, I think it's a very tragic one, but it's a very telling one. Can we come back? Yes, thank you. What you see here is a dam being broken down and water starting to flood out from the river. Now, and you see people on the top of the roofs. They might survive. They might. But what is sure that their daily life will be completely destroyed, their future will be destroyed. It will be an enormous setback for them, socially, environmentally, economically, in all of the three pillars. So, and you know, and we know, that it is happening at greater frequency, and the events are harsher and harsher, having deeper and deeper impact on people. If you take a look at the next picture, if you can, yeah. There is a very good colleague of mine who is a scientist, and he says that, look, you don't have to believe in global warming, but you have to understand that there is a problem if in your living room the water level is more than 2 feet, and it is happening regularly, then you have a problem. So indeed, whether you believe in global warming or climate change or whatsoever, one is sure that in all of the countries you have water-related extremities, whether it is drought, whether it is flood, and you will have to take care of that. Now, how you can do that? One issue is knowledge. Unfortunately, in many of the countries, if you can go further, Yep. One issue that in many countries you don't have data. You don't really know what are the areas that can be affected by drought, that can be affected by flood. And of course, the problem is that of course you have data from previous times, but the problem is that past will not give you the real effect of future events. As I have said, there are harsher and harsher events affecting more and more people. So possibly one of the solutions is to have some kind of a predictive system in order to take care of that. And if you have data, then you will be able to take different measures in order to take care of your people. And here we have listed some the possibilities. It of course means a lot of money, but not only money. It's about regulation. It's about good policies. It's about countries taking the right decision and possibly changing policies. For example, in Hungary, for let's say 200, 300 years, our approach with regard to floods was just to make sure that the flood goes through the country as quickly as possible and water leaves the country. And we are quite good at it. Now the problem is that we have drought in the summer season. So now the idea is why not to try to retain some of this water instead of letting it go through the country and use it for agricultural reasons, agricultural purposes, and so on and so on. So of course it's again country-based in many cases, well in all of the cases country-based. And of course the means and ways can be shared between countries, but the policies will have to be country-based. And also, as I have said, basin-based, which is regional-based. Now, the next issue that I wanted to talk about is monitoring and assessment. We always say that what you don't measure, you cannot manage, right? This is an eye-opening map again. It shows how much information was collected from different regions of the bird into a global database time. Okay. What it shows, and you see that there is this starting from 1990 and it goes up to 2004 to present. You would think that since 2004 to present is the blue, the whole map will be blue, because we have more data to manage, more data to be transferred, it's easier to transfer, and so on and so on. The problem is that on the ground, there is no data management. So therefore, there is nothing to put into the system at this moment, or at least it is not coordinated. So one thing what we want to make sure that we can manage water-related issues, whether it is safe drinking water, whether it is water-related extremities, and so on and so on. And if we can manage that, if we can measure that, then of course you will have much better solution on the country level. And then if you can put together those solutions and your strategies and all of your numbers to the international level, then what you will have is a coordinated international response possibility for water-related issues. And by the end of 2030, this is what we would like to achieve. Last two sentences, and last, can we go to the last slide? What we say is that none of the world's noble development goals could be reached without water. In fact, we will not survive without water. So therefore, what we say is that investing in water is investing in development, investing in human rights, but also investing in peace. I thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you, Ambassador Heresi, for sharing with us the Budapest Water Initiative and the importance of achieving clean water for all, and also bringing again to our awareness the effect of climate change. The presenter is Minister Councillor Neo Mark, who has assumed his present post as the Minister Councillor Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Singapore on January 2012. He joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Singapore in March 1997 and was posted as the first secretary to the Singapore High Commission in Kuala Lumpur from 1999 to 2003. He was appointed the Deputy Director of Malaysia and Brunei from 2008 to 2011. Mr. Mark received a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Western Australia in Perth, Australia, a Master's in Public Administration from Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy of the National University of Singapore from 2007 to 2008. Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Dr. Christine Deva, Ambassador Yuri Sergeyev, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the organizers for giving me the pleasure of speaking today, and I apologize for being late. I echo what the previous speakers have said on sanitation, but I will speak more narrowly on water and its linkages to sanitation and hygiene. My dear friend, Ambassador Zolt, has already given you the broad global perspective on the water challenge. My short statement here will be more focused on water and its linkages with sanitation and hygiene. As the speakers have said before, inadequate sanitation remains a pressing global challenge. 2.5 billion people do not have access to improved sanitation. More than 1 billion people still defecate in the open. Inadequate sanitation is a major contributor to health problems and diseases like diarrhea, which causes 760,000 preventable child deaths each year. What this number means is that it is almost every 1 to 2 minutes a child will die from diarrhea because of a lack of access, partly as a result of a lack of access to proper sanitation facilities. It also results in increased healthcare costs. Work and education also suffers. And girls do not go to school because of the lack of safe and proper sanitation. And women and girls constantly risk harassment and sexual assault without access to proper sanitation facilities. So increasing access to improved sanitation is still a work in progress. The Mdg Sanitation Target, Mdg 7C, is the most lagging of them all, and it will not be achieved before 2015. In fact, if we look at the current rate, it will only be achieved in around 2075. Therefore, it is imperative that all parties redouble their efforts to make as much progress as possible on the Mdg target in the time remaining, and to ensure that the issue of sanitation, water and hygiene, which we call WASH, is a key part of the SDGs and is carried forward from the Mdgs to the post-2015 development agenda. That is why we support the recent UN Secretary General's call to action on sanitation. From our point of view, sanitation is something that countries big and small, developed and developing, need to deal with. For example, Singapore's land area is about 700 square meters, just slightly bigger than the island of Manhattan. But nevertheless, extending sanitation services to Singaporeans took years of planning and commitment. When Singapore became independent in 1965, only 45% of the population had access to proper sanitation. It was only 3 decades later that all Singaporeans had access to proper sanitation. This required the Singapore government to clean up rivers, relocate businesses and industries, resettle squatters, and create new infrastructure. And Singaporeans themselves also had to change long-standing behaviors and habits over time. In this regard, we continue to take steps to overcome our natural constraints in this domain. About 40% of Singapore's water needs are served by importing water, mainly from our neighbor Malaysia. To ensure an adequate supply of water and to ensure the security of the supply of water, we rely on an integrated network of reservoirs, water desalination, and water reclamation. For example, through advanced membrane technology, we purify used water to drinkable standards. We call this new water, or as the UN Secretary General himself called it, a bit hyperbolically, he called it the elixir of life. And it is against this backdrop of our national experience and the global challenge of sanitation that we initiated and sponsored the UN General Assembly resolution earlier this year that designated 19 November as World Toilet Day in the context of sanitation for all. The resolution, we are pleased to say, was adopted by consensus and co-sponsored by 121 other countries. The inaugural commemorative event for World Toilet Day took place just recently. World Toilet Day is always commemorated on 19th of November, and it went well. All the speakers at the event reinforced the message that toilets and sanitation continue to be global challenges and echoed the call to action to achieve the sanitation target under the MDGs. Equally important, there was also a consensus that sanitation, as well as water and hygiene, should be positioned prominently in the SDGs and the post-2015 development agenda. This corresponded with the outcomes of the discussions on water and sanitation at the third meeting of the Open Working Group on Sustainable Development Goals in May this year. In this regard, the UNICEF and World Health Organization Joint Monitoring Program on Water Supply and Sanitation has done significant work in consultation with stakeholders in identifying targets and indicators for WASH. I'm not sure if a fact sheet that I sent over is being distributed, but if not, the organizers have a copy of it and they can pass you or email you the scanned copy of that document. It is a fact sheet that was provided, that was prepared by the Joint Monitoring Program on Water Supply and Sanitation, and they tried to outline various targets and indicators for a potential standalone goal on water, sanitation, and hygiene. I won't go into too much detail, but I would read out what they are proposing as the 4 main targets in this domain. Target 1 is, by 2025, no one practices open defecation, and inequalities in the practice of open defecation have been progressively eliminated. Target 2, by 2030, everybody uses a basic drinking water supply, and hand washing facilities when at home, all schools and health centers provide all users with basic drinking water supply and adequate sanitation, hand washing facilities, and menstrual hygiene facilities. And furthermore, inequalities in access to each of these services should have been progressively eliminated. Target 3, by 2040, everybody uses adequate sanitation when at home. The proportion of the population not using an intermediate drinking water supply service at home should have been reduced by half. The excreta from which at least half of schools, health centers, and households with adequate sanitation are safely managed, echoing what Ambassador Zob mentioned about the wastewater management and waste management aspects. And inequalities in access to each of these services have been progressively reduced. And finally, Target 4, all drinking water supply, sanitation, and hygiene services are delivered in a progressively affordable, accountable, and financially and environmentally sustainable manner. So really what the 4 targets are trying to say is that not only do we have to carry on with what we're trying to do under the MDGs, it's got to be carried forward through to the SDGs and the post-2015 development agenda. It's got to be sustainable, and it's got to encompass all the various cross-cutting elements that intersect with the WASH domain. For one very important example is the needs of gender needs, as well as the needs of the disabled in terms of getting access to proper sanitation and water supply. This is merely one grouping's outline of how a standalone goal would look like. But I would say that we are currently working with like-minded countries to bring such a framework or similarly articulated frameworks of a standalone goal with targets and indicators on water, sanitation, and hygiene into the intergovernmental negotiations on the SDGs and the post-2015 development agenda. But not only are we looking at a standalone goal for water, sanitation, and hygiene, we also plan to highlight the cross-cutting nature of water, sanitation, and hygiene for other potential sustainable development goals and post-2015 development goals. For example, in areas of sustainable resources management, inclusive and sustainable growth, ensuring basic living standards, etc., it's important to bring in the cross-cutting elements that water, sanitation, and hygiene have. And finally, I would like to say that while governments have a primary role, international organizations, the private sector, civil society groups also have a role to play. And all stakeholders need to work together to ensure that the pressing issue of water, sanitation, and hygiene continue to get the global, national, regional, and local attention that it urgently requires. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mark, for sharing with us Singapore's initiative of purification of water, not only from drinking, but for also achieving good sanitation. Ambassador Thomas Gass is the Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs at the Department of Economic and Social Affairs of the United Nations. Ambassador Gass was appointed as Switzerland's ambassador to Nepal 2009 and the country director to the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. In Nepal, he was the chair of the donors to the Nepal Peace Trust Fund, the main instrument for international support to Nepal's peace process, and the co-chair with the UN resident coordinator of the Donor Coordination Group. He also served as the Dean of Diplomatic Corps in Nepal. Prior to arriving in Nepal, he served as the head of the Economy and Development section of Switzerland's mission to the United Nations in New York. Ambassador Gass.
Thank you, Dr. Durbach, and Excellencies, Professors, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me, as we are getting to the closing of this conference, to express particular thanks to the government of Ukraine and the World Information Transfer Organization for this initiative and its substantive and refreshing and enlightening contribution to the follow-up of the Rio +20 conference and the shaping of the post-2015 development agenda. Today's conference has touched on vital aspects of the economic, social, environmental dimensions of sustainable development, including sustainable energy, sustainable sanitation, sustainable health, technology for sustainable development, and food insecurity. As my colleague Nikhil Seth pointed out in his opening remarks, this conference helps give concrete form to the term science-policy interface by bringing experts and intergovernmental policy shapers and policy makers together in a space in which we can draw lessons from concrete examples and initiatives. One of the important lessons of Rio +20, which is being reiterated in the deliberations of the Open Working Group on the Sustainable Development Goals, is that the 26+ issues that were identified in the Future We Want outcome document, including health and the environment, need to be discussed and tackled concretely through partnerships in a cross-cutting manner. This was also very much the spirit of today's discussions. Out of today's conference, I see the reaffirmation of a clear health-environment nexus that intersects with other nexuses that have been identified and discussed elsewhere, such as the water-energy-food nexus. Health for all in a sustainable, salubrious environment can only be achieved if there is sustainable energy for all, sustainable water and sanitation for all, and nutritious food for all and access to relevant technology. Health cannot be isolated from all these other factors that influence human health, which in the prosperous parts of this world and the prosperous parts of poor countries are taken for granted. Health and the environment and partnerships for their promotion need to be an integral part of the post-2015 development agenda. By mid-century, we'll be living in a world that may have grown from the present 7 billion to some 10.3 billion people. Already the world population is consuming 1.5 times the annual capacity of the Earth to regenerate itself. We are depleting natural capital rather than regenerating it. Alongside the overconsumption by the fortunate in both rich and poor countries, over 1 billion people are severely deprived in terms of basic needs for health, food, water, energy, sanitation, and education. Accelerating climate change, now confirmed with 95% certainty by the IPCC to be caused by humans, is putting the present and future livelihoods at risk. Increasingly frequent natural disasters, food shortages and rising food prices, scarcer water and deteriorating soils are affecting health and well-being of people everywhere, but most severely in the poorest countries. Accordingly, member states of the UN, as well as major groups and other stakeholders, are relying on 5 guiding principles for the post-2015 development agenda. Firstly, leave no one behind. Secondly, keep sustainable development at the core of the agenda. Thirdly, transform economies for jobs and inclusive growth. Fourthly, build peace and effective, open, accessible institutions for all. And finally, forge a new global partnership. At the center of the post-2015 development agenda are expected to be a set of sustainable development goals. The goals of the new development agenda will need to build on the progress achieved through the Millennium Development Goals, as this was reminded by several speakers today. The Millennium Development Goals have inspired the world to reduce by more than 1/2 the percentage of those living in absolute poverty. Yet, inequality across and within countries, including in access to health and a clean environment, has increased since the dawn of the new millennium. We need to finish the job started by the Millennium Development Goals so as to ensure the social inclusion of all those who are deprived and to protect future generations from deprivation. The new development agenda will need to give special attention to ensuring jobs for all, including, in particular, youth who in some regions face over 50% unemployment. The new development agenda will also need to heal the planet by counteracting the depletion of natural capital through decoupling economic growth from natural resources use. Health for the planet is invariably and directly linked to health for humans. The acute economic and fiscal crisis that most regions face today is leading to reductions in the social safety nets and on which many people depend, including in key sectors such as health and education. Health and education are often the first victims of fiscal austerity in both poor and rich countries. Today's event should play an influential role both through its outcome as well as the work of the individual countries and organizations represented here to ensure a health and environment-sensitive post-2015 development agenda with a set of global partnerships to implement it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Gass, for a very comprehensive summary of the session.